Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on October 11th, 2019, and is current through the Star Trek Short Trek episode, The Trouble with Edward, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 5 television shows at some point in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is Homer Frizzell. Homer, welcome to WeeklyTrek.
Alexander, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
No, I am thrilled to have you. Well, Homer, I ask my guests this question every week. I want to know something that's got you feeling good about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
Oh, man. There is so much. And so what I want to do, instead of just listing everything off, I want to dive into one small detail, which is the TOS era Romulan bird of prey in the Star Trek trailer, and wondering exactly how they're going to incorporate that and what sort of Romulans we're going to meet.
Yes, in the Picard trailer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a cool little moment. They're doing lots of these quick action cuts, and then all of a sudden, the ship, which presumably is the ship that Picard is on, is firing at a TOS-style Romulan bird of prey. That's not something you see every day.
No, not at all. And you have to wonder, like, wait a second, what sort of group has this kind of ship? Where have they been underground for so long? And what's the backstory? So I'm immediately just very, very curious, because the last time we met, well, at least the last time I met the Romulans was also with the Remans, and it was in the movie. And this is just hearkening back to TOS. You're like, what has happened in however 80, 90 years since?
Yeah, I have to wonder if there's a more tragic story, because you know, we know that in the intervening time between Nemesis and Picard, Romulus has been destroyed, right? That's established in the Star Trek 2009 movie. And it almost makes me wonder if, you know, with the Empire having sort of fallen to its lowest point, you know, these kind of really old starships are the only ones that they have left, that you know, the things that we saw in Nemesis, the Valdor type warbirds, the scimitar,
right,
the sort of trappings of the Empire are all gone now because the Empire itself is gone. And instead, I mean, it definitely seems like there's a big sort of immigration theme, maybe refugee theme that runs through Picard. At least that was according to Kurtzman at the panel that you were actually at the end of the Star Trek Universe panel, right? Yeah. What was it like being in the room?
Oh, first off, it was amazing. And when Sir Patrick Stewart came out on stage, he got a nice long standing ovation. It was so great to see him there for that, and he was very appreciative. The panel itself, I mean, they didn't get into too much detail, but they did show the trailer twice. And so it was interesting to see where people were loud. During the first part, of course, it's when you see Jonathan Frakes on screen and you see Maria Sirtis. Mm-hmm. And then the second time through, you're picking up on like, okay, they're more focused on this. And you get a different experience when you hear it the second time and you're able to hear everything else. Because the first time I heard it, I heard the child off screen. I actually thought that was someone that was in the theater because it was kind of loud. It's like, quiet over there. And the second time through, I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what's going on. So it was amazing. It was great. I'm glad I was able to get in there and see that, and then the Discovery panel as well.
Yeah, I am so jealous. Did you have to queue up for a long time in order to get in?
So the first time ever, I won the lottery, and I knew I had a seat going in, so I did not have to queue up.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that was nice. I was pretty close off to the side.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I was close enough that I spent my time watching the people more on stage than watching a screen off to the side.
Oh, well, that's really good because when I'm at STLV, I definitely am much more watching the screens than I am watching the people.
Yeah, I mean, I did have a little bit of obstruction because some people have long torsos, but other than that, I was in good shape.
Well, that's really cool. Well, the thing I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week is actually also a very quick moment. It's the establishing shot for this week's short trek, The Trouble with Edward. The opening shot is a very classic Star Trek opening where we get a captain's log and just this really gorgeous shot of the Enterprise approaching the McGee-class USS Cabot. It's just such a traditional Star Trek opening. The rest of the short trek has received, I think, a mixed reception, and we'll get into talking about it a little bit in one of our news stories today. But just that opening was so wonderfully nostalgic.
I really enjoyed seeing the Enterprise again.
Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
So we had a packed week for news again, mostly spinning off of New York Comic Con. So we recorded last week's episode at about 8:30 on Saturday night. The panel had been earlier in the afternoon, but the Star Trek Discovery cast and producers that evening were appearing at PaleyFest, which is a sort of a media gathering for fans for a panel discussion. And it was moderated by IGN's Scott Kalura, and there were press opportunities beforehand. And so our first two stories today come from TrekCore and Trek Movie. TrekCore got a lot of time with Alex Kurtzman, Heather Kadin, and Michelle Paradise, and Trek Movie got an opportunity to talk to some of the Discovery cast. But we will start with a big interview with Alex Kurtzman in which he dropped lots of little tantalizing nuggets about the state of the franchise and what's to come. So we will take them a show at a time because he really did cover the waterfront. In Discovery news, he said they were shooting episode 6 right now. So that was episode 6 as of a week ago. That there would probably just be 13 episodes this year. Last year was 14 episodes. The year before was 15 episodes. In both cases, they were supposed to be 13 episodes, but for story reasons, they made the decision to add a couple of extra episodes. So they say probably just 13 this year. And also that they filmed 6 full days in Iceland, which means that we know they did some filming in Iceland earlier this year. Again, it was TrekCore that broke that story. And they spent 6 days there, which is a decent amount of time and means they will have shot a decent amount of footage. So I'm sort of expecting that there will be more international on-location footage than season 1, where they filmed the teaser for the Vulcan Hello largely in Jordan. But I mean, 6 episodes in the can, Homer, 7 more on the way, decent amount of international shooting. Things are looking pretty good for Star Trek Discovery, don't you think?
Things are looking great. It's nice to be on the ship, but it certainly expands the world when they can be somewhere else. That's true in any Star Trek series that they've shot. I'm excited about the Iceland stuff. And what I've seen from the trailer, it's amazing. It's a nice change up.
Yeah, and Iceland's such a beautiful country. I mean, and it does have quite an alien look to it. So it seems perfect for, being 930 years in the future.
Yeah, I'm excited about that too.
So then on Star Trek Picard, some very exciting news. Seems like season 2 of Star Trek Picard, probably pretty much a sure run thing.
Yeah, I think from what I had seen, they're already starting to work on it. I was actually at a Barnes & Noble event with Ben Robinson and Todd Chernowski. Yeah, and he was talking about the logistics of shooting because you have guest stars, let's say, and that they are going to be in multiple episodes. So they're trying to do the shooting so that they can do the different episodes that they're going to be in while they're there so that they don't have to come back when they're shooting it. And so he's talking about there was one actor, I think, who's going to be in 4 of the episodes. I want to say it was 1, 6, 9, 10, something like that. They were working out how to do all of that shooting. And so I'm pretty excited to see what they've ended up with. I mean, not only are they going to end up with something that's going to be beautiful, but they're also thinking ahead and doing the shots that they need to do to make it happen.
Yeah, and extremely exciting that A, they're already hard at work on figuring out season 2, but B, that they're talking so openly about it. I mean, there was a little video clip that TrekCore posted, which I'd love to be able to share the audio, but there were audio issues with it, and it's really tough to actually hear. But the interviewer asks Alex Kurtzman, how about Star Trek Picard season 2? And Kurtzman basically says straight up, he says, definitely, already in the works. No question, no ifs, ands, or buts. It seems like Star Trek Picard season 2 is on the way. So we have 10 episodes of season 1 to look forward to for sure, but sounds like we have more than that coming as well. I mean, they've been saying for months, going all the way back to, I think, January, February of this year, that the way they'd sort of arced out the show, they thought they had about 3 seasons worth of content. But you know how these shows go, there's no guarantee that they're necessarily going to go to a second season if they're not successful enough. It sounds like Star Trek Picard is locked in for an additional season, which is super exciting. And I mean, I'm sure there'll be a formal confirmation coming up, likely after the series has premiered, but really, really confident.
Yeah, that could also have me going at Warp 10. But yes, you're absolutely right. That's exciting.
It sure does. But, more to come. And actually, one of sort of Kurtzman's kind of big picture comments in this interview was that they sort of had a game plan for the next 5 years worth of Star Trek content. So we're sitting here today in 2019 watching new Star Trek, right? There was a new short trek for those in North America this week, and we have it coming until 2024.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. We had 2 short treks inside of a week. That was great.
Oh, so much fun.
Yeah.
And we get 1 more in November, 2 again in December on the same day, which is really exciting. 1 in January, and then we're in 2020 when we know we've got 10 episodes of Picard, we've got 13 episodes of Discovery, and probably Lower Decks as well to look forward to. So lots and lots of Star Trek on the way.
And yeah, Section 31 on the horizon.
Absolutely. And speaking of animated shows, we also got a little bit of news for the Nickelodeon show, which we've not heard a lot about in recent months. We know there's a writer's room. The writers have been announced, and we know they are working on scripting the show. But Heather Kadin talked a little bit about what we can expect from the Nickelodeon show, which does have a name, just not one that we know about.
Yeah, that's a little frustrating, isn't it?
Yes. But we'll make it more exciting when we finally find out. And it actually seems like part of the reason why we haven't heard anything is because the animation style they've chosen, which is a 3D animation style, has such a long lead time. Actually, we may not even see the show on the air until after 2021. That's how long it takes to render some of this stuff.
Wow.
But exciting that we're going to get 2 different animation styles for each of these animated shows. So Lower Decks, which has more of a traditional animation style, versus this Nickelodeon show, which is going to be 3D. That's pretty exciting, right, Homer?
Yeah, absolutely. Outside of New York Comic Con, CBS had quite a bunch of advertising out there, and I got to see the Lower Decks stuff and Picard, and also Evil, which is not Star Trek at all, and then Discovery, but nothing from the No Name show yet. But it's very exciting. I mean, I can't wait to see what that's going to look like. I know a little bit the style, and it'll be interesting to see Star Trek looking that way.
Yeah, very non-traditional for us Star Trek fans.
Yeah, very much so.
But I think, some of the shows they were talking about, Troll Hunters, for example, which the Hageman brothers have done, it's certainly, and it's 3D animation, but it's not wacky animation.
Right. And I think it's going to open up Star Trek to a whole new audience as well.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, they also were very clear that the Nickelodeon show would not be, quote, talking down to kids. And also a little bit about the kind of structure of the show itself. Seems like it won't be, classically episodic, that there will be some serialized elements that will run through the show as well, which is really interesting. And I'm really interested to see what the show ends up being.
Yeah, me too. I like it when someone, in one episode, what they have done before carries on into the next episode. And it's not they have all of a sudden forgotten everything that they did previously.
And we got a couple of other little bits of news. They talked a little bit about, would we see Star Trek Discovery on the big screen now with the CBS Viacom merger? It sounds like, that's not something they're thinking about at the moment. Kurtzman was talking about how for them to put a story on the big screen, it had to be a story that suited the big screen, since they're doing so much cinematic stuff with television at the moment. And that kind of gives them that ability to tell longer form stories doing that. But perhaps the most interesting little nugget, in addition to season 2 of Star Trek Picard being in the works, which is a huge story in and of itself, was just this little throwaway line. The interviewer asked Alex Kurtzman about the news this past week that CBS has just opened a new filming studio in Toronto. So they've been renting a lot of space, like at Pinewood Studios in Toronto, which is where Star Trek Discovery is shot. But CBS has now opened their own dedicated television studio in Toronto. And the interviewer asked if there were plans for Star Trek to shoot there. It seems like a couple of the shows have potentially lined up to do a little bit of shooting there, But Kurtzman said that they did have plans to shoot a show there and asked, what they were planning to shoot there. His cryptic response was just the one word, something, to which Michelle Paradise then sort of jumped in and said, there are always more shows to come. So given that, they were then talking about the Section 31 show a little later in the interview where they were asked, is the plan still for Section 31 to film after Discovery Season 3 wraps? And the answer was an unequivocal yes. Something I think makes me think that they're thinking about not the Section 31 show, that they're thinking about some show that has not yet been announced, which I think could inspire some hope for the Pike show enthusiasts amongst us. Don't you think, Homer?
I think that would be great. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I would love it. Pike going back there, I don't want to say perfect captain, but he was a role model captain for sure. I just saw a picture here of the CBS TV studios, and they have essentially the Discovery cast there, not all of them, but Michelle Yeoh is there as well. So I feel like maybe they're talking about Section 31 there, but if it's Pike, then that's awesome. That's extra. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, you would think it was a Section 31 show because it's one we already know about. It's one they do need space to shoot, but it's just the way that he was happy to talk about the Section 31 show later in the interview, but at this point got very clammed up about, what they were planning to shoot at CBS Studios.
I would be overjoyed if there is a Pike series.
I mean, and it might be an entirely new series that we don't know about yet. I mean, there have been a couple of ideas that have been floating around since Kurtzman's franchise deal was announced that we've not heard anything about. The Starfleet Academy show, we've not heard anything about that for over a year. This sort of Nick Meyer Khan miniseries that sounds like it hit the rocks is also another one that's potentially floating out there, or it could be something entirely new that none of us know about yet.
Yeah.
So we will switch from the Kurtzman interview where we got so much information to Discovery cast interviews that TrekMovie.com did. These we got much less information out of. Cast members are always much more kind of reticent to share information because they will get in trouble if they overshare.
Exactly. I think they're told don't overshare, and so they undershare.
Right. And so you read the transcripts. So there's 3 interviews, one with Sonequa Martin-Green, one with Anthony Rapp, and one with Mary Wiseman. And you read the interviews, and they're very good at deflecting the actual question that was asked to answer the question that they wanted to be asked. It's almost politician-like in that way, but they're very adept at it. But there were a couple of little kind of tidbits of information that we can pull out from the interview. So Sonequa Martin-Green confirmed that a year passes at some point very early in season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, which sort of changes Burnham a bit. Anthony Rapp talked about how Stamets and Culber were back together and sort of clarified that he's not the chief engineer of the USS Discovery. And also Mary Wiseman talked about how Tilly, since Discovery has moved 930 years in the future, would have to deal with the upending of her ambitions for a successful Starfleet career, given the sort of future that they found themselves in. I think the additional time jump obviously we know the characters are moving 930 years into the future, but the additional time jump for the characters of 1 year in which will pass for them that we won't kind of see most of, that seems pretty interesting, and also kind of indicates there could be some changes to the characters in season 3 that we will have to prepare ourselves for. Don't you think, Homer?
Yeah, absolutely. But we don't know if the Discovery... or at least it's not clear to me. If say Burnham has a year go by, does it mean necessarily that a year goes by for Discovery itself? I guess it does, because there's like this big hug that happens. So I think the time spent for each of them separately is the same. I can't wait to see how they do this, but I do like how they showed the passage of time, at least with Michael Burnham, and she's kind of off by herself during this time. And
the trailer where it cuts the 3 shots and her hair gets long.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that gives cosplayers a whole bunch more stuff to work with too, which is good for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it does look like Sonequa Martin-Green will be rocking a new hairstyle for this season, and I actually think it looks really cool.
It does. It looks great.
Okay, so that was pretty much all the information we got from those 3 interviews, so we will move on. This week, we got a new short trek.
Yeah.
If you are outside of North America, I'm sorry you still don't have access to the short treks. If you don't want to be spoiled, I recommend jumping ahead a couple of minutes, see if we're still talking about it, and then skip ahead a minute more. But there was, following the release of The Trouble with Edward this week, there were a couple of interviews that went up with H. Jon Benjamin, who played Edward Larkin in the short trek. He was talking to Sci-Fi Wire, and they asked him sort of a little bit about, I think there's been this debate over Larkin, and I think it has sort of indicated whether you liked the short trek or not, because it's a bit unclear whether he is evil or an idiot.
Yeah.
If you think he's evil, I think you enjoyed the short trek a lot more because he definitely, sort of got what was coming to him. If you thought he was an idiot, you maybe didn't like the short trek as much because it definitely felt like he was being picked on a bit and not really kind of getting the support that he needed. And that obviously sort of led to this situation.
Yeah, I think his character is a bit more complicated, or at least I would like to think so.
Right.
I think that he thinks he's got a great idea, and he doesn't care that people don't agree with him. And he's also a loner. And he believes that his idea, if he can make it happen, is going to make the world a better place. So he wants to do it. And his execution wasn't as great as it could have been by any stretch. But I think he's one of those villains or antagonists that you can kind of identify with. And you're like, oh, yeah, it's kind of a good idea, but not exactly. And I wouldn't have done it that way. Yeah, I've watched it a couple times, and the first time I was like, I very much like Q&A more. And then the second time I watched it, I kind of warmed up to it a little bit and was trying to get a little bit more inside the character of Larkin. And I'm going to have to watch it maybe 2 or 3 more times too, to figure out exactly how I come down on the episode.
Yeah, Benjamin definitely plays it with a lot of nuance. I mean, he talks in the interview about how he kind of had a conversation with the writer of the short trek, Graham Wagner, beforehand to sort of get a sense of, how he should be playing the character, whether he was going to play him more down the kind of evil line or the way that Benjamin describes it, the sort of lunatic line, and he went more with the lunatic direction. But there definitely is a lot of nuance to the performance, which is why it has landed very differently for a lot of people. Which in some ways is actually it's nice to have something that challenges us and that creates some discussion, and that people are reading it differently and getting different things out of it in the process.
I absolutely agree.
He also talks in the interview about how he was a TOS fan growing up, and that The Trouble with Edward was sort of well in line with the comedic tone of a number of episodes of the original series, which it's definitely kind of the closest I think Star Trek has come in a really long time to full-on slapstick humor. But definitely I think there are certainly many silly moments in not just the original series but also in some of the other shows as well. And he also says he would return, but that's only if Larkin survived, which it certainly seemed like was not the case by the end of the short trek.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I one thing I really liked about the short trek, I had a mixed reaction to it as well. I kind of felt like Larkin, because he played him with a little too much pathos, I felt like you sympathized with him more than the episode actually wanted you to sympathize with him. Like they just wanted you to straight out see that he was a terrible employee who sort of got what was coming to him because of his idiocy and his hubris. But Benjamin plays the character with enough heart that I felt quite sorry for Larkin. But one thing I did really like about the short trek was I actually really like this as a retconned origin for the Tribbles. It always seemed to me this idea that the Klingons saw them as this major menace that they had to go on this great hunt to wipe out based on their previous appearances always seemed a little too silly, right? I mean, they multiply, but we never really saw them multiply. But in this episode, the Tribbles are actually really menacing in terms of the way that they nearly suffocate somebody to death, and then Larkin at the end of the episode gets almost basically killed by an avalanche of Tribbles.
Yeah, he may have been suffocated, or he may have just decided to eat Tribbles to save himself. I don't know. It makes what Worf was talking about in Trials and Tribulations, like great Klingon warriors went out and hunted the Tribbles. Mm-hmm. And we see the crew of the Cabot going out there with their pulse phasers, I think, because they fire differently than the TOS phasers. And they were not able to defeat the Tribbles. The Tribbles actually took over the ship. So you're like, okay, Worf, I get it. Maybe Tribbles are a bit more challenging than Odo gave you credit for.
Right.
So, yeah.
So our last story this week is an announcement of a new book. It's the 40th anniversary of Star Trek The Motion Picture, and we are not done with celebrations of the first Star Trek movie. So we had cinematic showings of the movie about a month ago. We had the release of the reprint of the novelization of the motion picture by Gene Roddenberry just last week. And coming in May of 2020 will be Star Trek The Motion Picture, The Art and Visual Effects, a new book specifically focusing on the art and the effects for the motion picture. This book will be written by Jeff Bond and Gene Kazicki. It'll be available in May of 2020. It's now available for pre-order on Amazon in the US just a couple of days ago. This, I think, is a book that is long overdue. Of all of the movies that have come out, Star Trek The Motion Picture, for everything you can say about the story, is certainly one of the most visually arresting movies of any of the 13 that we've had to date. And so getting a book that focuses on that art and the stupendous visual effects achievements of ILM and the team who did the special effects is really, really exciting. And this one I'm very much looking forward to. How about yourself, Homer?
Yeah, what Douglas Trumbull did on the motion picture is incredible, especially in the amount of time that he had to do it. I mean, he had worked on 2001, and the fact that he's not a CGI guy because it's before CGI. So the effects are mainly about playing, I say playing, but working with cameras, multiple cameras, and getting this stuff that he knows he can get. And there was a panel, I think it was at Star Trek Las Vegas. You're like, wow. I had a fresh appreciation for the film. And then it's the 40th anniversary, and I got to see it on the big screen back about 4 weeks ago here in New York City. And it wasn't like it's not like it's high def, but you're watching it on the big screen. You're like, man, this is incredible. The effects that they were able to do, and then to be able to bring that to a book. Yeah. So the short answer to your question is yes, I'm excited for the book.
It's going to be good. I mean, it definitely is like the most beautiful movie. And I'd never seen it on the big screen before the cinematic showings a few weeks ago. And I certainly got a new appreciation for the art direction and the production design on that movie, because it really is something else to see it on the big screen.
It totally is. And the score is amazing as well.
Oh, for sure. All right. Well, we've talked about the facts. And now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
Well, each week, I and my guest give you a wish or a theory we're nurturing about Discovery, Picard, Lower Deck, short treks, merchandise, books, anything about the Star Trek franchise. So, Homer, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
So, what I've seen so far is that in all of the short treks, there's been a tie-in to Discovery. And some of them are like, initially when the short treks first came out, I was like, there's no way. This is totally unrelated. There's no way this is coming in. And then they kept tying it in. So I think the trouble with Edward, well, first off, I would love that there is a tie-in to Q&A, that we get to see Una /1, depending on who you're talking to, and Spock again on Discovery, or a spinoff. So that would be amazing. But I'm just trying to, right now, since I just saw the Trouble with Edward, I'm thinking, wait a second, how could they possibly tie this in? And so the question is, to me, is it going to be Captain Lucero, or is Larkin going to be in it? And so Larkin, we think, may not have made it out of the Tribble wave, and he might have passed away on the Cabot. We know Lucero got away okay. Or perhaps, and this I think would be the most interesting part. I mean, I love Lucero as a character, but more interesting to me, tying it back to the interview with H. Jon Benjamin, is like, how did someone like that get into Starfleet, get posted on presumably a prestigious post on this vessel, the Cabot? Like, how does that happen? So I would love it if there was some sort of exploration about how this guy got to be in Starfleet, what went on behind the scenes, what what his skill set is or what his connections are.
Oh, yeah, that'd be cool. I think probably not going to show up again in Discovery just because it's a millennium in the future. But we know that the Tribbles end up back in the 24th century thanks to Trials and Tribulations. So, like, Lower Decks seems like a perfect kind of place for a Trouble with Edward tie-in. Section 31, going down the line that you were just talking about, in that H. Jon Benjamin interview, there was...
Exactly, right.
He was asked a question about, do you think Larkin was a Section 31 plant to sort of infect the Klingon Empire with this parasite? And Benjamin's response was something along the lines of, yeah, maybe. Of course, he had no clue if that was the case or not. But I mean, yeah, there's lots of ways that it could tie in. And that's a really great point, which is that the short treks last year, we didn't think they were going to tie into Discovery at all. And then with the exception of the Escape Artist, they all did. So it's possible that some of the ones this year too could as well and surprise us in that way.
Yeah, I hope so.
So my wish this week is a wish. And it's not a super positive one, but it's something that's been on my mind for a little while, which is about merchandising and the continuous decision that licensees make to not make Dr. Crusher merchandise.
Oh, I'm on board there.
Yeah, it's like we've seen this happen a few times now. Pop Funkos were a perfect example. The New Zealand Mint has a number of Star Trek The Next Generation related products coming out. There's a new kind of line of little wooden figurines of the Next Generation cast. And for some reason, they always make 6, where the Next Generation cast was 7, and they always leave out Dr. Crusher. There's no Crusher Pop Funko. The New Zealand Mint is doing 6 of the main characters in the Next Generation, but they're little kind of silver notes. They're not doing Dr. Crusher. And this new kind of line of little figurines, they're doing 6 and they're not doing Dr. Crusher. I mean, set aside the conversation about whether you think that Gates McFadden should reprise her role of Crusher in Star Trek Picard. I still believe that she
So, Alex, wait, sorry, there's no Pop Funko of Dr. Crusher?
Yep, they did the 6 other main characters of the Next Generation, but not Crusher. BS. It's crazy.
That is crazy.
It keeps happening over and over again. And obviously, Dr. Crusher is a character who does have a lot of fans. But I mean, in 2019, for them to be leaving out one of the only 2 female main characters from this show, when 50% of the Star Trek fan base are women, is just a crazy decision that they keep making again and again and again. I don't understand it at all. And let's get more Dr. Crusher merchandise out there, please, CBS. I think there are people who want to buy it, and it's just ludicrous. There's no other way to describe it than to say it's ludicrous.
Agreed. I am behind you 100%, and I have a little bit of Dr. Crusher merchandise, but it's not official CBS stuff, so hopefully they're not listening.
Yeah, you can buy there are people who have made Pop Funkos of Dr. Crusher, so you can get them on eBay, but they're not made by Pop Funko. They're just made in the same style.
Yeah, this has to change.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on board with you.
Do you have a theory or wish for Discovery, Picard, or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Homer Frizzell, for joining me today. Homer, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
I think the best place as it relates to Star Trek is on Twitter, and I am at Frizzell, which is FRIZZELL.
And you can find this show on Twitter at Weekly Trek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Homer. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.